The sound of gunfire echoed through the valley as the stagecoach careened wildly along the dusty trail, its wooden wheels bouncing violently over the uneven terrain. Josephine Clarke clutched her younger sister's trembling hand, her knuckles white with fear as the driver above shouted curses at the pursuing bandits. The year was 1878, and what had begun as a hopeful journey to a new life in Steins Pass, New Mexico territory, had descended into a nightmare of flying bullets and terror. "Stay down, Martha," Josephine hissed, pushing her 15-year-old sister's head below the window frame as a bullet splintered the wood mere inches from where they huddled. Their third sister, Rebecca, 19 and normally stoic, had pressed herself against the floor of the coach, her eyes squeezed shut in silent prayer. The three Clarke sisters had left their home in St. Louis 2 weeks ago after receiving word that their parents and brother had perished in a flash flood while establishing their new ranch near Steins Pass. The sisters were all that remained of the Clarke family, journeying west to settle their parents' affairs and somehow forge a future from the ashes of tragedy. A sudden jolt threw Josephine against the opposite seat as the stagecoach lurched sickeningly to one side. The driver's voice, previously shouting defiance at their attackers, went silent. The horses whinnied in panic, their pace faltering without guidance. Through the small window, Josephine caught sight of a red bloom spreading across the driver's shirt as he slumped forward, reins slipping from his lifeless fingers. "We're going to crash," Rebecca cried, her composure finally breaking. The stagecoach veered sharply to the right, heading straight for a steep embankment. The world became a chaos of splintering wood, screams, and darkness as the coach tumbled down the slope. Josephine's last conscious thought was of her sisters as something hard struck her temple, and blackness engulfed her. When awareness returned, it came with the sensation of gentle movement and the creak of leather. Josephine's eyes fluttered open to find herself draped across an unfamiliar saddle, the ground moving rhythmically beneath her. Her head throbbed with each step of the horse that carried her. "Martha? Rebecca," she called weakly, attempting to push herself upright. "Easy there, miss," a deep voice responded, and a strong hand steadied her. "You're safe now." Josephine twisted to see the source of the voice and found herself looking up at a man silhouetted against the brilliant blue New Mexico sky. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of a worn leather hat, but she could make out a strong jaw lined with several days' worth of stubble. "My sisters," she insisted, her voice stronger now as panic surged through her. "Where are my sisters?" The man's expression shifted, shadows crossing his features that had nothing to do with his hat brim. "I'm sorry, miss, I only found you—" "No," the word came out as barely a whisper. "No, they must be there. We need to go back. I searched the whole wreck," the stranger said gently. "You were the only survivor. The bandits took everything of value and left no one else alive." A sob tore from Josephine's throat as she struggled against his grip, nearly toppling from the horse in her desperation. "You're wrong. They can't be gone. They're all I have left." The man dismounted in a swift, fluid motion and helped her down, supporting her weight when her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. Up close, she could see his features clearly now, weathered skin tanned by the sun, eyes the color of a summer storm, and an expression of genuine compassion that only deepened her grief. He looked to be in his early 30s, his face etched with the hard-won wisdom of the frontier. "My name is Colton Yates," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I'm taking you to my ranch about 3 miles from here. You need rest and medical attention." "I need my sisters," Josephine whispered, tears streaming unchecked down her dirt-smudged face. "They're all the family I have left in this world." Colton's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders, his gaze holding hers with unexpected intensity. "I understand loss, Miss Clarke, Josephine Clarke. Miss Clarke, I understand what it means to lose everyone. And while I know it doesn't help right now, you're not alone out here." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. The sisters wept for their lost kin, the cowboy said, then I'll be the family you need. My mother used to say that sometimes family is what we find, not just what we're born with. Josephine stared at him through her tears, unable to fully process his words through the haze of her grief. But something in his steady presence anchored her as the world seemed to crumble around her. I can't leave them, she insisted, turning toward the direction they'd come from. We'll go back, Colton promised, his voice gentle but firm. But first, you need water, food, and rest. You've been unconscious for hours, and you won't be any good to your sisters if you collapse. I give you my word, we'll return and give them a proper burial. The brutal honesty of his words, the acknowledgement that there would be no rescue, only burial, broke something inside Josephine. Her legs finally gave way, and she would have fallen if Colton hadn't caught her, sweeping her up into his arms with surprising gentleness for a man of his size and strength. I've got you, Miss Clarke, he murmured as he set her carefully back on his horse before mounting behind her. I've got you. As they rode toward his ranch, Josephine leaned weakly against his chest, too numb and exhausted to protest or maintain proper distance. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her back was the only thing that felt real in a world suddenly emptied of everything she loved. Colton's ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest but well-maintained property nestled in a shallow valley. A sturdy log house stood at its center, flanked by a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, and Josephine could see a figure moving on the porch. My foreman, Colton explained, following her gaze. Manuel Garcia, he and his wife Alina helped me run the place. As they approached, the man on the porch straightened, concern evident in his posture even from a distance. He called something over his shoulder, and a moment later a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on an apron. Senor Colton, ¿Qué pasó? Manuel called as they rode into the yard. Stagecoach attack, Colton replied grimly. This is Miss Josephine Clarke. She needs care. Alina hurried forward as Colton dismounted and gently lifted Josephine from the saddle. The older woman's face creased with sympathy and concern as she took in Josephine's battered state. Ay, pobrecita, she murmured, gesturing for Colton to bring Josephine inside. The spare room is ready. The next hours passed in a blur for Josephine. Alina's gentle hands cleaned her wounds and helped her into a borrowed nightgown. A cup of hot broth was pressed into her hands, and though she had no appetite, she sipped mechanically, knowing she needed strength. Through it all, the reality of her sister's deaths hovered like a dark specter, too monstrous to fully comprehend. Night had fallen when a soft knock came at her door. Josephine, sitting up against the pillows and staring unseeing at the far wall, didn't respond. After a moment, the door opened slightly and Colton's voice came through the gap. Miss Clarke, may I come in? She nodded, then realizing he couldn't see her in the dim lamplight, cleared her throat. Yes, Colton entered, hat in his hands, his tall frame seeming too large for the modest room. He remained by the door, respecting her space. How are you feeling? He asked, then grimaced. Forgive me, that's a foolish question. I'm alive, Josephine replied hollowly. Which is more than I can say for my family. Colton nodded, accepting her bitterness without judgment. Alina said your physical injuries aren't serious, mostly cuts and bruises. My parents and brother died in a flash flood last month, Josephine said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. We were coming to Stein's Pass to settle their affairs and decide what to do with the land they'd purchased, now Martha and Rebecca. Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Colton crossed the room in 2 long strides and sat carefully on the edge of the bed, still maintaining a respectful distance. I'm truly sorry, Miss Clarke. No one should have to bear so much loss. What am I supposed to do now? She whispered, the question directed more at fate than at the man beside her. Tomorrow we'll ride back, he said quietly. We'll find your sisters and give them a proper burial, then you'll rest and heal after that. He paused. After that, you have choices. I can help you return east if that's your wish, or you can stay and see about your parents' land. Josephine looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time since their meeting. In the soft lamplight, his face was open and honest, his eyes reflecting genuine concern rather than pity. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Yates? You don't know me." A shadow passed over his features. "6 years ago, I was the sole survivor of an Apache raid on a survey party. A rancher found me half dead and took me in, nursed me back to health. He didn't know me either." He looked down at his hands. "I swore I'd pass on that kindness if I ever had the chance." The simple truth of his explanation silenced any further questions. Josephine nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond words. "Try to rest," Colton said, rising. "We'll leave at first light if you're strong enough." True to his word, Colton was ready at dawn, 2 horses saddled and waiting in the yard. Josephine emerged from the house dressed in clothes Alina had altered for her, a simple riding skirt and blouse that had belonged to the older woman's daughter, now married and living in Santa Fe. Though physically recovered enough to travel, Josephine moved like someone in a dream, her grief a palpable weight on her shoulders. Manuel approached, leading a 3rd horse laden with shovels and other equipment. His weathered face was solemn as he handed Colton a bundle wrapped in canvas. "For the señoritas," he said simply. Colton nodded his thanks. "We should be back by nightfall. Keep an eye on things, Manuel." The foreman glanced at Josephine with sympathy. "Vayan con Dios." The journey back to the site of the attack was undertaken mostly in silence. Josephine rode beside Colton, her back straight with determination despite her inner turmoil. As they approached the ravine where the stagecoach had crashed, she steeled herself for what lay ahead. The scene was even more devastating in the harsh light of day. The stagecoach lay shattered at the bottom of the embankment, its frame broken like a toy discarded by a careless child. Personal belongings were scattered across the ground, picked over by the bandits but deemed worthless for their purposes: a hairbrush, a book of poetry, a shawl Josephine recognized as Martha's favorite. And then she saw them. The still forms of her sisters lay near the wreckage, covered hastily with branches by Colton during his initial discovery. A keening sound escaped Josephine's throat as she slid from her horse and stumbled toward them. Colton was beside her in an instant, his steady hand on her elbow preventing her from falling. Together they approached the makeshift covering, and with gentle reverence he removed the branches. Martha's young face was peaceful in death, almost as though she were sleeping. Rebecca lay beside her, her hand outstretched as if reaching for her younger sister, even in her final moments. They had died together, at least having each other for comfort in their last moments, a small mercy that only deepened Josephine's anguish at being separated from them. "They were so young," she whispered, kneeling between them. "Martha was just 15. She was afraid of coming west, but she trusted me when I said it would be an adventure." A sob caught in her throat. Rebecca was going to be a teacher. She was so smart, always reading, always asking questions. Colton knelt beside her, silent but present, allowing her grief the space it needed. When Josephine's tears finally subsided enough for her to speak again, she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Will you help me bury them together? They wouldn't want to be separated." "Of course," he answered simply. They worked through the morning, Colton digging the grave while Josephine gathered wildflowers to place with her sisters. She spoke to him as they worked, stories of her family tumbling out as if by sharing their lives she could somehow keep a part of them alive. She told him of her father, a successful merchant who had dreamed of raising cattle in the West, of her mother, who had been reluctant to leave St. Louis but had ultimately embraced the adventure for her husband's sake. She spoke of her brother Thomas, 22 and full of grand plans for the ranch they would build, and of Martha's talent for music and Rebecca's passion for books. Colton listened, offering quiet questions that kept her talking, understanding instinctively that the stories were a form of healing. As the sun reached its zenith, they carefully wrapped Martha and Rebecca in the clean canvas Manuel had provided and lowered them into the grave. Josephine stood at the edge, words failing her as she tried to say goodbye. Colton removed his hat and stepped forward. "I didn't know these young women," he said, his deep voice steady and respectful, "but I know they were loved. I know they had dreams and hopes and that this world is poorer for their passing." He glanced at Josephine. "Would you like me to say a prayer?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Colton bowed his head and spoke simple, heartfelt words asking for peace for the departed and strength for those left behind. When he finished, Josephine placed the wildflowers on her sister's shrouded forms and whispered her own goodbye. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as they filled the grave and marked it with a cross fashioned from pieces of the stagecoach. Josephine stood silent and drained, staring at the fresh mound of earth that now held half her heart. "We should go," Colton said gently, touching her arm. "It's not safe to be out here after dark." Before they left, Josephine gathered what personal belongings she could find scattered around the crash site, her sister's treasured items, a locket containing a family portrait, letters from their parents that Rebecca had kept. These fragments of their lives were all she had left now. The ride back to Colton's ranch was slow, Josephine's grief weighing heavy on her shoulders. As twilight painted the landscape in shades of purple and gold, she finally broke the silence. "My parents bought land near Stein's Pass," she said, her voice rough from crying. "I don't even know where it is or what state it's in. All the papers were in our luggage." "Stein's Pass is about 20 miles south of here," Colton replied. "It's a small settlement, mostly serving the railroad that came through 2 years ago. I know most of the property in the area. If you can tell me your father's name, I might be able to help you locate it." "Josephine Clarke," she said. "He wrote that it was good grazing land with a year-round spring." Colton nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like the old Henderson place, about 10 miles southwest of Stein's Pass. A decent property, but Henderson couldn't make a go of it alone and sold out last year. I didn't know your father had purchased it." The knowledge that Colton might be able to help her locate her parents' land gave Josephine something concrete to focus on, a small anchor in the storm of her grief. "Could we go there? Not tomorrow, but soon." "Of course," Colton agreed. "But first, you need to rest and recover your strength." They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, the shared task of burying her sisters having forged an unspoken bond between them. When they reached the ranch, Alina was waiting with a hot meal and sympathetic eyes that asked no questions. That night, in the quiet of her borrowed room, Josephine finally allowed herself to fully comprehend her situation. She was alone in a strange territory, with no family, little money, and few prospects. The land her parents had purchased was her only asset, but what could a single woman do with a ranch in the New Mexico territory? Sleep eluded her, and as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Josephine made a decision. She would see her parents' land, assess its value, and then sell it to finance her return east. There was nothing for her in the West now, only painful memories and lost dreams. Over the next week, Josephine slowly regained her physical strength. Alina's motherly care and nourishing food helped heal her body, while the routine of ranch life provided a welcome distraction from her grief. She insisted on making herself useful, helping with cooking and mending, learning the rhythm of life on a cattle ranch. Colton himself remained a constant, steady presence. He never intruded on her privacy, but was always available when she sought company or conversation. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in breathtaking colors. During these quiet moments, Josephine learned more about the man who had saved her life. Colton Yates had come west from Pennsylvania after the Civil War, seeking opportunity and distance from painful memories. He'd worked as a scout, a buffalo hunter, and eventually a ranch hand before saving enough to purchase his own small spread 5 years ago. Through hard work and smart decisions, he'd built it into a modest but successful operation. "I never planned to stay," he admitted one evening, his voice thoughtful as he whittled a piece of pine. "Thought I'd make some money and head back east, but something about this land gets under your skin." Josephine understood what he meant. Despite her determination to leave, she found herself entranced by the wild beauty of the territory, the vast open spaces, the dramatic sunsets, the star-filled nights that made her feel simultaneously insignificant and infinite. "It's beautiful," she conceded, "but harsh." Colton nodded, his hands never ceasing their skilled movement with the knife. "Life out here strips away pretense. You see people for who they really are. The land doesn't care about your background or your social standing. It only respects honesty, hard work, and grit." His words stayed with Josephine as she retired that night, making her question her hasty decision to sell her inheritance without even seeing it first. Perhaps she owed it to her parents' memory to at least understand what had drawn them west with such hope and determination. 10 days after the stagecoach attack, Colton deemed Josephine recovered enough for the journey to her parents' property. They set out early, Josephine riding a gentle mare from Colton's string, with provisions for a full day's outing. The trail took them southeast, following a shallow valley before climbing into low, rolling hills covered with scrub and scattered juniper. As they rode, Colton pointed out landmarks and wildlife, sharing his knowledge of the land with natural ease. "This territory demands respect," he explained as they paused to rest the horses beside a small, steep spring. "But it gives back in its own way. The seasons here have their own beauty. Spring brings wildflowers like you wouldn't believe, entire valleys turned purple and gold. Summer's harsh, I won't lie, but the monsoon rains bring life back to everything. Fall is mild, perfect for gathering cattle. And winter has a stark beauty all its own." Josephine found herself hanging on his words, seeing the landscape through his experienced eyes. "You truly love it here, don't you?" Colton's weathered face softened as he gazed across the vista before them. "I do. Took me a while to admit it, but yes, this is home now." By midday, they crested a final rise and Colton reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, pointing to a valley spread below them. "The Clarke Ranch." Josephine's breath caught in her throat, the property nestled in a natural basin, protected on 3 sides by gentle slopes. A small creek, lined with cottonwoods, cut through its center, creating a ribbon of green in the otherwise golden landscape. On a slight rise stood a simple cabin, its windows dark but its structure sound. Nearby, the framework of what would have been a barn stood, partially completed, her father and brother's last project before the flood had claimed their lives. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Your father chose well," Colton agreed. "The spring feeding that creek never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. The basin creates natural protection for cattle in winter, and there's enough grazing land to support a decent herd." They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the cabin, Josephine's emotions threatened to overwhelm her. This was where her parents had planned to build their new life. This was where her brother had expected to make his fortune. This was the future they had sacrificed everything for, only to have it snatched away before it could begin. The cabin was simple but solidly built, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. Dust had settled on the few pieces of furniture, but otherwise, it stood ready for inhabitants who would never arrive. Thomas's tools still lay beside the half-built barn, awaiting his return from town, a return that never came. Josephine moved through the space in silence, touching her mother's rocking chair, her father's pipe left on the mantel, her brother's jacket hanging on a peg by the door. Their presence lingered in these abandoned possessions, making her loss feel freshly raw. "They were so full of hope," she said finally, her voice breaking. "They believed in this place, in the future they could build here." Colton stood in the doorway, giving her space while remaining a reassuring presence. "Hope isn't something to be taken lightly out here. If they believed in this land, they must have had good reason." Josephine nodded, wiping away a tear as she continued to explore the cabin. In a small trunk, she found what she'd been hoping for: her father's documents, including the deed to the property, bank papers, and letters from the Territorial Land Office. Among them was a journal in her father's familiar handwriting. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, opening the leather-bound book with trembling hands. The final entry, dated just 3 days before the flood, caught her eye. Thomas and I laid the foundation for the barn today. The boy works harder than any 2 men I've hired before. He has visions for this place that exceed even my own ambitious plans. Elizabeth still misses St. Louis, but she's coming around to the beauty of our new home. I believe once the girls arrive, this place will truly become the family haven we've dreamed of building. There is something healing in this land, something that speaks to the soul if one listens carefully enough. Josephine closed the book, clutching it to her chest as fresh tears welled in her eyes. Her father's words echoed Colton's sentiments about the territory, revealing a connection to the land she hadn't understood before. They were happy here, she said softly, looking up at Colton. Even with all the hardships, they found something that spoke to them. Colton nodded, his expression gentle. The question is, does it speak to you too? It was a fair question, one Josephine wasn't prepared to answer. She tucked the journal and important papers into her saddlebag, taking one last look around the cabin before they departed. As they rode away, she glanced back several times, unable to shake the feeling that she was abandoning something precious. That night, back at Colton's ranch, Josephine pored over her father's papers by lamplight. The property was fully paid for, with no outstanding debts against it. There was even a modest sum in a bank in Steins Pass, enough to purchase initial livestock and supplies if she decided to try working the land, if she decided. The thought stopped her short. Was she actually considering staying? A week ago, her plan had been clear sell the property and return east as quickly as possible. Now, having seen the land, having read her father's words, doubts crept in. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, setting aside the papers. Colton entered, carrying a cup of tea. "Elena thought you might want this," he said, setting it beside her. His eyes fell on the scattered documents. "Making plans," Josephine sighed, running a hand through her loose hair. I'm not sure what to do, honestly. I came west expecting to settle my family's affairs and return to St. Louis. Now you're not sure if that's what you want," Colton finished for her, leaning against the doorframe. "It's a common affliction out here. The territory has a way of changing a person's plans." "It's not just that," Josephine admitted. "In St. Louis, I have acquaintances but no real family left. My parents sold everything to purchase this land. There's nothing waiting for me back east except memories and perhaps a position as someone's governess or companion." Colton considered her words thoughtfully. "And if you stayed, what would that look like?" It was a practical question that required a practical answer, yet Josephine found herself without one. "I don't know," she confessed. "I know nothing about ranching. I've never even ridden a horse until this past week. The idea of a woman running a cattle ranch alone is challenging," Colton supplied when she trailed off, "but not impossible. There are several women ranchers in the territory, widows mostly, who took over when their husbands passed. They manage. With help, I imagine," Josephine said, meeting his gaze directly. Colton didn't look away. "Yes, with help." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Josephine had been aware of her growing feelings for Colton, gratitude blending with admiration, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. His kindness, strength, and quiet integrity had become a lifeline in her sea of grief. But she'd attributed these feelings to her vulnerable state, never considering they might be reciprocated. Now, seeing the way he looked at her, she wondered if perhaps she wasn't alone in navigating these confusing emotions. Colton broke the charged silence first, straightening up from the doorframe. "Whatever you decide, there's no rush. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to sort things out. Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He nodded, a small smile touching his lips before he bid her good night and left her to her thoughts. Sleep came fitfully that night, Josephine's mind torn between the pull of her parents' dream and the practical realities of her situation. By morning, she had reached no firm decision, but she knew one thing with certainty: she wasn't ready to leave New Mexico yet. Over breakfast, she asked Colton if he would take her into Steins Pass the following day. "I need to speak with the bank and perhaps meet some of the townspeople. If I'm to make an informed decision about my future, I should understand the community better." Colton readily agreed, and the next morning found them riding into the small settlement of Steins Pass. The town had grown up around the railroad station, consisting primarily of a single dusty street lined with essential businesses: a general store, saloon, small hotel, blacksmith, and the territorial bank. As they tied their horses outside the bank, Josephine became acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. A young woman in riding clothes, accompanied by Colton Yates, was evidently a source of interest in the small community. "Word travels fast in these parts," Colton murmured, helping her down from her horse. "The stagecoach attack was news, and your survival even bigger news. Prepare for questions." Inside the bank, the manager, Mr. Simmons, greeted them with professional courtesy that warmed considerably when Josephine introduced herself as Jonathan Clarke's daughter. "I was grieved to hear about your parents and brother, Miss Clarke," he said, ushering them into his private office. "A terrible tragedy, and now to lose your sisters as well. Please accept my deepest condolences." "Thank you," Josephine replied, maintaining her composure with effort. "I've come to inquire about my father's accounts and to establish my position as his heir." Mr. Simmons proved helpful and efficient. With the papers Josephine had recovered from the cabin, he was able to confirm her access to her father's modest savings. He also provided valuable information about local cattle prices and the costs of running a small ranch. "Your father had sound plans," he told her as they concluded their business. He understood that starting small and growing carefully was the key to success in this territory. Too many come west with grand visions and insufficient capital or experience. As they left the bank, Josephine felt a small sense of accomplishment. She now had access to funds and a clearer understanding of her financial position. It wasn't wealth by any means, but it was enough to give her options. Their next stop was the general store, where Josephine intended to purchase some basic supplies and perhaps some fabric for new clothing. Alina's borrowed items were serviceable but ill-fitting for Josephine's taller frame. The store owner's wife, Mrs. Henderson, proved to be a fountain of information about the community as she helped Josephine select appropriate fabrics. "We don't have many single women in Steins Pass," she commented, eyeing Josephine with open curiosity. "Especially not educated Eastern ladies." "I expect you'll be returning to civilization soon." "I haven't decided," Josephine replied honestly. "My family invested everything in their ranch. I need to determine what's best for the property before making any decisions." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "You're considering staying alone? My dear, that's simply not practical. A woman needs protection out here." Josephine bristled slightly at the implication. "I'm not without resources, Mrs. Henderson, and I believe my father saw potential in this territory that I owe it to his memory to explore." The older woman's gaze flicked meaningfully to Colton, who was examining farming tools across the store. "Well, with the right help, I suppose anything is possible," she said with a knowing smile that made Josephine blush despite herself. Their final stop in town was the local newspaper office, where Josephine hoped to place an advertisement for ranch hands should she decide to stay. The editor, a scholarly-looking man named Peterson, was intrigued by her situation and offered to publish a short article about her arrival and connection to the Clarke property. "People respect a woman with gumption, Miss Clarke," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "If you're serious about making a go of the ranch, you'll find this community supportive, if a bit curious about your methods." By the time they left Steins Pass in the late afternoon, Josephine felt both encouraged and overwhelmed. The townspeople had been generally welcoming, if somewhat doubtful about her abilities. The practical challenges of running a ranch remained daunting, but the day had shown her that she wouldn't be completely without support if she chose to stay. "What did you think?" Colton asked as they rode home through the lengthening shadows. "I think it's a community of good people who can't quite decide if I'm brave or foolish," Josephine replied with a small smile. "Perhaps I'm a bit of both." Colton chuckled, the sound warming something inside her. "That description fits most of us out here. The line between brave and foolish is mighty thin on the frontier." "Did you think I was foolish today?" she asked, suddenly wanting his honest assessment. He considered her question seriously before answering. "No. I think you're a woman facing difficult choices with courage and intelligence. You're asking the right questions and considering your options carefully. That's not foolish, that's admirable." His words settled around her like a comfortable blanket, providing reassurance she hadn't realized she needed. They rode in companionable silence for several miles before Josephine spoke again. "If I decide to stay," she said carefully, "would you consider advising me?" "About cattle, ranch management, hiring hands. I'd pay you for your time, of course." Colton glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "You don't need to pay me, Josephine. Neighbors help each other out here. It's how we all survive." The use of her first name didn't escape her notice, nor did the implication that he already considered her a neighbor rather than a temporary guest. Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle acknowledgement that their connection had deepened beyond mere circumstance. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to Josephine's life. Mornings were spent helping Alina with household tasks, learning the practical skills of frontier living that her privileged upbringing hadn't prepared her for. Afternoons often found her riding with Colton, learning about the land, cattle, and the seasonal patterns that governed ranching life. In the evenings, she would pore over her father's journal, tracing his journey from enthusiasm to genuine love for the territory. His words became a bridge connecting her to both his dreams and her own emerging appreciation for this wild, challenging place. 3 weeks after the stagecoach attack, Josephine woke to the realization that she had made her decision without consciously arriving at it. She would stay, at least long enough to give her parents' vision a fair chance. She would honor their memory by continuing what they had begun, learning what they had come to love about this harsh but beautiful land. She announced her decision over breakfast, watching Colton's face carefully for his reaction. The smile that spread across his features held genuine pleasure, confirming what she had begun to suspect, that he wanted her to stay for reasons that went beyond neighborly concern. "I'll need help," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "I can learn, but I can't do it alone." "You won't be alone," he replied simply. That afternoon, they rode to her property together, this time with purpose rather than exploration in mind. Josephine had compiled a list of immediate needs: repairs to the cabin roof, completion of the barn before winter, fencing for at least part of the property, and eventually cattle. As they surveyed the half-built barn, Colton assessed the work with a professional eye. Thomas had good instincts. "The foundation is solid, the framework just needs completion. With 3 or 4 men working, we could have it finished in 2 weeks. "We?" Josephine questioned, noticing his inclusion. Colton met her eyes steadily. "Yes, we. I've got time between the fall roundup and winter to help you get established. Manuel can manage things at my place for a while." The offer was generous beyond expectation, and Josephine found herself momentarily speechless. "I don't know how to thank you," she finally managed. "You can thank me by succeeding," he replied with a smile. "Nothing would please me more than seeing this valley filled with Clarke cattle." The following weeks brought activity and purpose back to the Clarke Ranch. With advertisements placed in both the Steins Pass Gazette and larger papers in Silver City, Josephine began receiving inquiries from potential ranch hands. Colton helped her interview candidates, his experience invaluable in selecting men who were both capable and trustworthy. By early October, the barn was completed, basic fencing installed, and the cabin refurbished with a new roof and properly sealed windows to withstand the coming winter. Josephine had hired 3 permanent hands: an experienced older cowboy named Jim Dalton, who would serve as foreman, a young but hard-working man called Pete Williams, and a Mexican vaquero named Miguel Ortiz, whose knowledge of cattle was matched only by his skill with horses. With Colton's guidance, she purchased a small starting herd: 30 breeding cows and 2 bulls, a modest beginning that could be managed by her small crew while she learned the business. The day the cattle arrived, driven onto her land by Colton and her new employees, Josephine felt a surge of emotion that brought tears to her eyes. "They're here, Father," she whispered as she watched from the cabin porch. "Your dream is taking shape." That evening, they celebrated with a simple meal prepared by Josephine in her newly appointed kitchen. Jim, Pete, and Miguel ate heartily before retiring to the bunkhouse, another structure completed under Colton's supervision. Left alone with Colton at her small table, Josephine raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said softly. "To new beginnings," he echoed, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. In the soft lamplight, with the sounds of her ranch settling around them, Josephine recognized the crossroads before her. Colton had become far more than a helpful neighbor or even a friend. His steady presence, his unwavering support, his quiet strength had become essential to her. She had come to rely on his judgment, value his opinion, and most dangerously, crave his company. "Colton," she began, setting down her cup with hands that weren't quite steady. "I don't know how to say this properly, but I need to try." He waited, patient as always, giving her the space to find her words. "When I lost my sisters, I thought I'd lost everything. My entire family gone in the span of a month. I couldn't imagine going on, couldn't see any future worth fighting for." She took a deep breath. "But you showed me kindness when I had nothing to offer in return. You helped me bury my dead and then showed me how to build something new from the ashes of loss." Colton's expression softened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "I've come to care for you," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances of our meeting. I don't expect you to return these feelings, but before you return to your own ranch, I needed you to know how deeply grateful I am for everything you've done." For a long moment, Colton was still, his gaze never leaving her face. Then, slowly, he reached across the table and took her hand in his. "Josephine," he said, his voice low and earnest, "from the moment I found you in that wreckage, something inside me knew you were going to change my life. I told myself it was just concern, just duty, but these past weeks—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "These past weeks have shown me that what I feel goes far beyond duty or even friendship." Josephine's breath caught as hope bloomed in her chest. "I care for you too," he continued. "More than I thought possible after knowing you such a short time. I don't want to return to my ranch and leave you here, at least not permanently." "What are you saying?" she whispered. Colton's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I'm saying that if you'll allow it, I'd like to court you properly, to see if what's growing between us might become something lasting." Joy, unexpected and overwhelming, surged through Josephine. "I'd like that very much," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. The smile that broke across Colton's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture both chivalrous and full of promise. "Then I'll be staying for dinner more often, Miss Clarke," he said, his eyes twinkling with happiness. As autumn deepened into winter, Colton's courtship of Josephine became the subject of good-natured gossip in Stein's Pass. His frequent presence at the Clarke ranch raised few eyebrows after all. A young woman alone needed protection and guidance in such a harsh territory. But the way they looked at each other when they rode into town together told a story that even the most disinterested observer could read. For Josephine, these months brought both challenges and joys. The learning curve of ranch management was steep. but with Jim Dalton's practical experience and Colton's guidance, she gained confidence daily. Winter in the New Mexico territory proved less severe than she had feared, though cold nights and occasional snow squalls tested her resilience. Through it all, her relationship with Colton deepened and strengthened. They established a rhythm of shared work and quiet evenings, getting to know each other's histories, dreams, and quirks. Josephine learned that Colton had lost his parents to illness as a young man and had fought for the Union in the Civil War, experiences that had shaped his self-reliant nature but also left invisible scars. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her close relationship with her siblings, and her secret ambition to write stories of the West for Eastern newspapers. As Christmas approached, Josephine found herself preparing for a holiday that would be both joyful and tinged with sorrow. It would be her first Christmas without her family, a thought that sometimes ambushed her with grief when she least expected it. Yet she was determined to create new traditions in her new home. She invited Colton, Alina, and Manuel to join her ranch hands for Christmas dinner, wanting to fill her cabin with warmth and friendship to counter the absence of her family. In the days leading up to the holiday, she baked cookies from her mother's recipes, decorated with pine boughs gathered from the hills, and even managed to find small gifts for everyone: handkerchiefs for the men, a colorful shawl for Alina, and for Colton, a fine leather journal she'd ordered from a catalog. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of snow that transformed the landscape into a sparkling wonderland. Josephine rose early, already anticipating the arrival of her guests in the afternoon. As she stoked the fire and began preparations for the feast, a knock at the door surprised her. Colton stood on her porch, his arms filled with packages and his face alight with boyish excitement that made her heart skip. "Merry Christmas," he greeted her, stomping snow from his boots before entering. "I hope I'm not too early." "Never too early," she assured him, taking some of the packages so he could remove his coat, "but I wasn't expecting you until dinner." "I wanted some time with you alone before the others arrive," he explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice that intrigued her. "I have something important to discuss." Josephine's pulse quickened as she set the packages on the table. "That sounds serious." "It is," Colton agreed, moving to stand before her. He took both her hands in his expression growing solemn. "Josephine, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, watching you face challenges with courage and determination, seeing your kindness and intelligence. I've fallen in love with you completely." The declaration, though not entirely unexpected given the deepening of their relationship, still took her breath away. "Colton, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know it hasn't been long since we met, and I understand if you think this is too soon. But life out here has taught me not to waste precious time when something truly matters." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I love you, Josephine Clarke. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Josephine's eyes as Colton opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but brilliant diamond. It was beautiful, but it was the love shining in his eyes that truly overwhelmed her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Colton, I love you too. I would be honored to be your wife." Joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. When he lowered his head to kiss her, Josephine met him halfway, her heart overflowing with a happiness she had once thought lost to her forever. They broke apart only when the need for air became pressing, both laughing softly at the intensity of the moment. Colton rested his forehead against hers, his voice rough with emotion. "When I found you that day, I never imagined you would become my whole world," he confessed. "I only knew you needed help and I could provide it." Josephine's fingers traced the line of his jaw, still marveling that this good man loved her. "I remember what you said to me that first day," she murmured. "The sisters wept for their lost kin," the cowboy said, "then I'll be the family you need." You've kept that promise in ways neither of us could have foreseen. And I always will, he vowed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The rest of Christmas Day passed in a blur of joy and celebration. When Alina, Manuel, and the ranch hands arrived for dinner, Colton and Josephine announced their engagement to whoops of approval and heartfelt congratulations. Even Jim Dalton, normally reserved, offered a toast to their happiness. Knew it from the start, he declared, raising his cup. Some things are just meant to be. As winter gave way to spring, Josephine and Colton's plans for both their marriage and their ranches took shape. They decided to combine operations, maintaining both properties but centralizing their home at the Clarke Ranch due to its superior water source and natural protection. The wedding was set for May, when the desert would be in bloom with wildflowers. Josephine wrote to a few distant relatives and childhood friends in St. Louis, inviting them to the ceremony, though she held little expectation that many would make the journey. To her surprise, 3 accepted an elderly aunt and 2 friends curious to see the territory that had captured Josephine's heart. As the wedding day approached, Josephine found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. In less than a year, she had lost her entire family, survived a violent attack, and built a new life in a territory she'd never expected to call home. She had learned skills her St. Louis upbringing never prepared her for riding, basic veterinary care for cattle, managing ranch hands, and negotiating cattle prices. Through it all, grief had remained a companion, sometimes receding to a dull ache, other times surging forward with breathtaking force. But alongside it had grown joy, purpose, and love, a love she had never anticipated finding in the aftermath of such devastating loss. The night before her wedding, Josephine rode alone to the grave where her sisters lay buried. The spring rains had encouraged wildflowers to bloom around the simple cross, nature's own tribute to the young lives cut short. Kneeling beside the grave, Josephine spoke softly to her sisters as if they could hear. "I'm getting married tomorrow," she told them, arranging fresh flowers she had brought. "His name is Colton, and I wish you could have known him. Martha, you would have teased me about how he looks at me. Rebecca, you would have approved of his intelligence and kindness." Tears flowed freely down her cheeks, but they were different from the tears she had shed here months ago, tempered now with acceptance and even gratitude for the brief lives that had touched her so profoundly. "I miss you every day. I miss Mother and Father and Thomas too. But I've found happiness here in this place they chose. I've found love and purpose. I think they would be proud, don't you?" A gentle breeze rustled the wildflowers, and Josephine chose to take it as agreement. Rising, she touched the cross one last time before mounting her horse for the ride home to the man who would become her husband, to the life they would build together. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of desert blooms. The ceremony took place on the Clarke Ranch, beneath a canopy constructed by the ranch hands and decorated by Alina with ribbons and flowers. Reverend Wilson from the church in Steins Pass officiated, his weathered face beaming as he united the couple before the assembled guests, a mix of townsfolk, neighboring ranchers, and Josephine's few Eastern visitors. Josephine wore a simple gown of ivory silk, ordered from a Denver dressmaker, with her mother's lace veil and the locket containing the family portrait. As she walked toward Colton, radiant in a new black suit, she felt a profound sense of rightness, as if every difficult step of her journey had been leading her to this moment, this man, this life. Their vows were traditional but spoken with deeply personal meaning, each word a promise forged in the unique circumstances of their meeting and courtship. When Reverend Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the gathered community echoed across the valley that was now truly their home. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to satisfy even the hungriest ranch hand. As twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Colton led his bride away from the festivities toward their cabin now, renovated and expanded over the winter months to accommodate their shared life. On the porch, he paused, turning to face her with eyes full of love and promise. "Are you happy, Mrs. Yates?" Josephine's heart swelled at the new name, a symbol of her new beginning. "Happier than I ever thought possible again," she answered honestly. "When I lost my family, I thought I'd lost everything, but you showed me that the heart can rebuild just like this ranch. You helped me find strength I didn't know I had." Colton drew her close, his arms strong and secure around her. "You had that strength all along, I just reminded you it was there." He brushed a tender kiss against her forehead. "Together, we'll build something lasting here. Something that would make your family proud." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Josephine leaned into her husband's embrace, grateful for the unexpected gift of his love. The journey that had begun in tragedy had led her to this moment of perfect contentment, not an ending, but a beginning rich with possibility. The years that followed proved the wisdom of their union, both personally and professionally. Under their joint management, the combined Yates-Clarke Ranch grew into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Colton's practical experience and Josephine's keen business mind complemented each other perfectly, allowing them to weather the inevitable challenges of ranching life: droughts, harsh winters, fluctuating cattle prices, and occasional conflicts with rustlers. Their greatest joy came in the spring of 1881 with the birth of their son, Jonathan Thomas Yates, named for Josephine's father and brother. A sturdy, healthy boy with Colton's eyes and Josephine's determined spirit, he brought a new dimension of happiness to their lives. 2 years later, twin girls Martha and Rebecca completed their family, their namesakes a living tribute to the sisters Josephine had lost. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Colton surprised Josephine with a special gift: a small printing press installed in what had once been the ranch's storage room. With it came a commission from the territorial newspaper to write a monthly column about life on a New Mexico ranch, fulfilling Josephine's long-held dream of writing for publication. "You've given me so much," she told him that night, curled against his side as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "A home, a family, a purpose." Colton's arm tightened around her shoulders. "You've given me the same and more," he replied, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "Remember what I said to you that first day, that I'd be the family you needed?" Josephine nodded, the memory still clear despite the years that had passed. "I was so lost then, so broken. And now," he asked softly. She turned to face him, placing a hand on his weathered cheek. "Now I'm found. We built our own family, our own legacy. It's different from what I imagined as a girl in St. Louis, but it's better in so many ways." As darkness settled over their land, Josephine thought of all the twists of fate that had brought her to this life: the tragedy that had claimed her parents and brother, the attack that had taken her sisters, and the chance meeting with the man who would become her husband. Out of great loss had come immeasurable gain, a truth that she carried with her always. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely voice rising toward the star-filled sky. But Josephine Clarke Yates was no longer lonely. Surrounded by the family she and Colton had created, rooted in the land her parents had chosen, she had found her place in the vast, wild beauty of the territory she now proudly called home. As the children grew, so did the legacy Josephine and Colton built together. Their ranch prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and fair dealings. Josephine's monthly column in the territorial newspaper evolved into a popular series that was eventually compiled into a book, Letters from a Ranch Wife, published in 1890 to critical acclaim in both the West and East. Jonathan, their firstborn, inherited his father's natural affinity for ranching and his mother's intelligence. By his 18th birthday, he was effectively managing large portions of the operation, freeing Colton to focus on expansion and Josephine to pursue her writing. The twins, Martha and Rebecca, grew into capable young women with distinct personalities, Martha drawn to music and teaching, Rebecca to medicine. Inspired by the territory's need for trained physicians, through it all, Josephine and Colton's partnership remained the cornerstone of their success. They weathered challenges together: a devastating drought in 1887 that nearly bankrupted smaller ranches, Colton's broken leg from a fall during a roundup that left him bedridden for months, and the political uncertainties as the territory moved toward statehood. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, they hosted a celebration that brought together the entire community. As twilight settled over the gathering, Colton raised a glass to toast his wife before their assembled friends and grown children. 20 years ago, I found a brave woman in the wreckage of a stagecoach attack, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet gathering. She had lost everything but refused to be defeated. She built a life here, helped build our community, and gave me more happiness than any man deserves. To Josephine, my wife, my partner, my heart. Tears glistened in Josephine's eyes as she raised her own glass in response. And to the cowboy who said, "I'll be the family you need when I thought I had no one left in the world. You kept that promise and so much more." As New Mexico finally achieved statehood in 1912, Josephine and Colton, now in their 60s, watched with pride as the territory they had helped shape became the 47th state in the Union. Their ranch, now primarily managed by Jonathan and his wife with assistance from the twins when they weren't pursuing their own careers, stood as testament to what determination and love could build even from the most painful beginnings. On quiet evenings, they still sat together on the porch of the home they had expanded over the decades, watching the sun set over land that had sustained 3 generations of their family. Sometimes Josephine would think back to that frightened, grieving young woman who had arrived in the territory with nothing but loss and uncertainty. The journey from that moment to this one, surrounded by family, respected in the community, content in her accomplishments, seemed almost miraculous in retrospect. "What are you thinking about?" Colton would ask, recognizing the contemplative expression that still, after all these years, made her face glow with a beauty age couldn't diminish. "About how endings sometimes turn out to be beginnings," Josephine would reply, her hand finding his with the ease of long practice. "And how the family we make can heal the wounds left by the family we lose." In those moments, with the vast New Mexico sky stretching endless above them and the ranch quiet around them, they would share a smile that contained all their history: the grief and joy, struggle and triumph, loss and love that had shaped their remarkable life together. And in that smile was the knowledge that out of tragedy had come a legacy that would outlast them both: a family bound not just by blood but by choice, a ranch built from determination and vision, and a love story that had begun with the simple, profound offer of connection when it was needed most.